Muirne, I'll just give a little introduction here because I'm sure you know, but just from the place I'm coming from. It is said that Muirne's father, Taig MacNuat, didn't want her to marry her lover Cool, who was the leader of the Fianna of Ireland. That was because he was afraid of losing his white mansion on the Hill of Allen if she took a husband he did not choose. So when Muirne went with Cool, Taig looked to the High King, Con Céad Catha, for help, saying that Cool had stolen his daughter. As a result, Cool was killed at the Battle of Nuckna by the one-eyed Gull MacMorna, who took over leadership of the Fianna. After Muirne discovered that her husband was dead, she also discovered she was to have a baby. When her son Demna was born, she knew his life would be in danger as the leadership of the Fianna was his inheritance. So she gave him into the care of her husband's sister Bovill and the warrior woman Leah Lucra, who took Demna into hiding. So according to Dáithí Hogan, the one-eyed, this is the place where I'm kind of coming in with my perspective, I suppose. According to Dáithí Hogan, the one-eyed Gull MacMorna was an emanation of Balor of the Evil Eye, the father of Ethna, who also had to part with her child Lou for fear of him being killed. Here I have used artistic license and given Ethna to Muirne as a mother, because their stories have so many similarities. Very often in Irish mythology, it is hard to find a mother, as identities are given by naming only a father. Throughout the story, Muirne chants prayers to her mother, invoking her help so that she would have different outcome. I have named this story Tenim Leda, and it means a chant or a method of divination. Also, I think literally it means breaking the pith, like the skin of an orange, to get to its essence. So, Tenim Leda. No one believed that I heard him die, that I could hear his last roar over the mayhem on that day. Who knows the roar of one man over another, they said. I did. I knew his voice above the flying javelins, the clashing swords, the thundering hooves. I knew how his mouth would have fallen when he took his last breath. I walked over bodies to find him, to close his eyes, to say goodbye to my husband Cool of the Sons of Bashna, leader of the Fianna of Ireland, dead, and I, Muirne, was left with his child, taking root like a little tree in my womb. I found him. I could see he had struck the man who lay beneath him. Two enemies grotesquely entwined, two men with wives and homes no different to each other, two boys who were once the wonders of their mothers' hearts. It had been in my mind that he would lift me up and swing me around with joy when I told him his child was in my belly. I told him then for what it was worth. Cool, I said, as I held his dead face in my hands, I have your child. And as I said it, my body stiffened, chilled to the core, because I saw my mother's fate looking for me. I whispered a prayer to her. Mother, please, I do not want your story. I had gone with Cool from my father's house willingly. It had been said that I was stolen by him. I was not. I went away from the house of my father, Taig MacNuat, because I loved the man who was accused of being my captor. He was more like my saviour than my captor. There had been no happiness for me since my mother Ethna had gone to the island of apples. My mother would have known that Taig had no intention of losing a daughter to her own notions. She would have known that he would want to keep me in until he found someone of his choosing, some rich lord, good for his prosperity. I wonder, would she have stopped me from going with Cool? Would I have listened to her? I don't think so. I went with Cool, not knowing that my father would make the battle that killed the leader of the Fianna of Ireland, my love and father of my child. One-eyed Gull MacMorna took his place and was jubilant. His thirst for power defeated any grief he might have had for his leader. That was a surprise, because the Fianna were known to be loyal and loving to each other. And so I knew I must be careful. It would not be happy news to him that Cool's beloved widow might bear a child who would contest him. I also knew by then that my father would seek to kill my child for the same reason. I was sure of that because it was my mother's story waiting for me if I walked into it blindly. I whispered, Mother, I promise he will not kill my child. It was Bovill's It was Bovill, my husband's sister, and her great friend, the warrior woman Leah Lucra, who took my baby to safety as soon as he was born. It was so hard for me to agree to that because I knew it was right. And so in secret, I bore a beautiful boy who I named Demna, my little stag. And while my breasts were still full of his milk, they took him to Slieve Bloom, from where they could see the highest points of all the provinces of Ireland. I loved his name. It was precious to me because it was all I ever gave him, except for heaving him into the world along with my invocations and my sacrifice, so he would have a chance to fulfill his destiny. He is my beautiful boy, I said, as Bovill and Leah, who took him far away from me with tears streaming down all of our faces. I fell to my knees to hold on to my breaking heart. He was gone, and I was emptied of all that was good that had been mine for so short a time. I cursed the men who had brought such loss upon me that day. Then I wondered about the use of women's curses. Instead, I whispered, Mother, help me to make mine into a different story. Bovill and Leah were good to Demna and to me, sending me news of him whenever they could. Leah taught him to swim when he was only a baby. She said, I threw him into the water and up he came swimming like a little fish. They said he was a wonder child for doing all he did so young. They told me he brought down a duck with only a dart on his first hunting trip. They said he left no hair in the fields by running as fast as them. They told me of his growing, his pink cheeks and his hair as fair as the sun. Hearing about his hair struck fiercely into my heart, and I thought of my fair-haired mother who had lost her children too. I whispered, Mother, his hair is your hair. Mother, I see you loving him. And I cry. I continued to hear from the women who said the spirit of wisdom was living all around him. Sometimes he spoke of fire in the water, and it was because of his fire talk they sent him off with the travelling poets. They let him go, knowing the poets would shave his head and reduce his wants up in the hard mountains and valleys as they travelled through the dreams of Ireland. However, his time with the poets was interrupted by a marauder who killed them all. And for what? I don't know. The only danger those men had in them were the fires in their hearts. The murderer's name was Fionn, who had at least a shred of a scruple left in him when he spared my little boy. So Demna made his way back to the women, who, because of their intuitions, were already out looking for him. They found him, and on their way home, Demna brought down a deer. So for a while after that, Leah could rest because they had their own little hunter. They watched him intensely, and they were right, because danger lurked on every bend. Gull Muirne knew there was a son of Cool living, but he didn't know where. He had only one task on his mind, that was to kill him. I whispered, Mother, keep him high in your mind for me. After a time, Demna left the women to go on his travels alone, sometimes meeting others, eating and playing with them, often beating them at their own games. His hair grew again, beautiful and fair as the sun. He went to Loch Lane, that is the lake of learning, and he went into service with the king of Fintra, who said to him, if Cool had a son, you would be he. And so he left there for fear of being discovered by Gull. He came to me in Kerry, where I was married again to a king of a small kingdom. My husband was happy to put the boy into service until he saw one day that he was implausibly good at the game of chess. Who are you? He said. Demna said he was the son of a farmer. But my husband saw the look in his eyes that is in my own when I am lying. He knew then he was my son, and so the son of Cool. He banished him because he didn't want the child to be murdered in his kingdom. I lamented that I was not like Bovill and Leah, who had learned to fight and hunt, to be able to mind myself and my own child instead of making curses to float around with all the other women's curses, finding their way into some but never reaching their target. Everyone was afraid of Gull, except for the brave women that were Bovill and Leah Lucra. Demna travelled on alone from there, having to learn so much so fast, and as I saw him walk away, I knew my heart was nearly finished, as again I whispered, Mother, his hair is your hair. Mother, when you remember your children, remember mine. My mother, Ethna, had borne 3 children against the will of her one-eyed father. 2 of them were thrown into the sea. Only one, called Lou, escaped because he was saved by a woman of the She, who was Birog of the mountain. Birog took him to his father's people with 2 of the Danann, until a prophecy was fulfilled when Lou became the slayer of his one-eyed grandfather. I whispered again, Mother, he has your hair. Hold him high in your mind for me. On one of his journeys, Demna met with an old hag with blood smeared over her face, wailing and telling him about a fierce fighting man who had killed her only son. Demna chased and killed that man, who turned out to be the man who gave his father Cúil his first wound in battle, where he died. The hag said, "It is good you've killed him, because he had a bag of treasure that belongs to you. It is made for the skin of the beauty of Aoife Nic Delbach, who was the lover of Ilbrech, son of Monaghan MacLear. It is a sad story about a woman called Lucra Nic Avertach, who also loved Ilbrech. And since he didn't love her back, she changed poor Aoife into the form of a crane through a spell made up of her jealousy. All the treasures that were dear to Monaghan are carried inside that bag. There's his great blue cloak, his belt and his knife, the King of Loughlean's helmet, the King of Scotland's shears, the bones of Assel's swine, and the girdle of the great whale's black back. Take it to your old Uncle Crimmel. He is the right one to have it. Tell him there's a sacred word for every one of these, and tell him he will only find what is there when the tides are close to the shores. When the tides retreat, the bag will be empty. When you are done with that, go and find the poet Fionn, who has been sitting beside the river goddess for the last 7 years, looking for the wisdom of the salmon that has eaten 9 hazelnuts from the hazel tree at the bottom of the ocean. That is where you will find the wisdom of the earth and the heavens combined." Demna thanked the old hag, knowing it was his fate to have met her. I whispered, "Mother, he has your hair and your magic and your prayer." After Demna delivered the crane bag to his uncle Crimmel, he came to Fionn just as he had caught the great salmon of wisdom. Fionn told Demna he was happy to see him and to teach him. His first task was to watch that salmon as it was roasting on the spit, but he warned, "Do not eat it at all costs." Demna obeyed, but as he turned the fish on the spit, a blister appeared. He reached out without thought to burst the hot blister. "Ouch," he said, as he put his thumb into his mouth. When Fionn heard him, he looked for reassurance that Demna hadn't eaten the fish. "No, I did not," said Demna, still sucking his sore thumb. "But didn't the skin of the fish blister burn my thumb when I burst it?" Fionn realized that the wisdom was not meant for him. It was for this boy who had travelled so far in his young life. It was then the great poet renamed my son and gave him the name Fionn because of the golden lightness of the hair on his head and the wisdom of the earth and the sea inside him. "Mother, he has the name of your hair. I see you smiling. Thanks for your prayer." It was after that he went to Tara at Sound, to the haunted feast that was held there every year. There was a great condition held over the feast that all grudges were to be put aside. It was the perfect night for Fionn to come unknown to the High King to offer his service and to tell him who he was. The king accepted his service happily because he had great regard for his father, Cúil. He told Fionn to sit down with the Fianna, but before he did, he told the king the words that were flying. But before he did, Fionn told the king the words that were flying like birds around in his head that were, "It is when the grudge is put aside, the night will come alive and fire." The king spoke. The boy is right. For 9 years now, on this very night, a man named Elaine comes from She Finnecha. He puts us all to sleep with his magical harp. Then when our heads hit the table, he burns Tara down around us. If there's a man among you who can remain awake and put a stop to the burning, I will give him whatever inheritance he is due, big or small, there and then. Fionn knew his task was his, and he stood up to tell the king he would stand awake to meet the foe. The company laughed. The king accepted with a smile on his face that was kind enough to allow the child the strength of his convictions. Then, encouraged by the king's entertainment of the boy's belief in himself, a man called Fiche came to Fionn and gave him a special sword that had never had a wrong cast. Fionn accepted, and just as the music of the magical harp began, he saw the company fall, one by one, into a fateful sleep. He pressed the sword against his forehead to give himself pain, and that way he remained awake, and was able to quench the fire Elaine had started. When the company awoke, they saw Elaine chased out by a boy not yet fully grown up into manhood. Up and down over the hills Elaine ran with surprise and terror at the boy was full of his own wonder. With the task completed, Fionn returned to Tara with the head of Elaine under his arm, just as the company were waking up. It was on that morning that my son became the leader of the Fianna of Ireland. His rightful inheritance was to lead a band of men who would always be outside the world of reasonable society, who always kept the dreams of Ireland alive in their hearts. Muirne was usurped, but it was in the code of the Fianna that no warrior could ever hold a grudge against another. And so Fionn's leadership was rooted well. And I whispered, Mother, he has your hair. You held him high in your mind. Mother, he is there.